Welcome back to Digital Tutors. In this lesson, we are going to talk about visual flow because now that you've familiarized yourself with the footage that we're working with, it's really time to start putting it all together into a visual flow. So we can start off here and we're going to talk about the three-act structure within a scene. So the three-act structure is pretty simple. If you've ever written an essay, then you know the three-act structure. You have the introduction or the beginning. You have the body or the middle with all the rising action and all the things that are going on, and then you have the conclusion, which either summarizes the whole thing or just gives you a nice little sum up resolution of some kind. And that can describe an entire film, but that also should describe each individual scene. You're looking for those shots that are good lead in, that kind of bring our audience into the action. You're looking for those shots that are a good way to leave, whether it slows it down or it speeds it up or it's a cliffhanger ending, depending on what's coming up next or what the purpose of the piece is, and then what kind of parts are going to take us through the gist of the information and everything that we're trying to accomplish with the video. So you're always looking for that three-act structure at that beginning. So here you'll notice we have all of these shots that are just kind of in a random order. And there isn't that much of a story going on here other than the fact that we introduce with these two. It's obviously kind of a gritty fight training building because you have this chain link fence here and all that, and it's kind of an artistic shot to start off with. That's not bad. Then we move in closer to her so we can kind of really concentrate on who she is, because this first shot you see her from behind. Then you have a real close-up of her face. We cut back out to start the action again to see where we are and what's happening. Then we cut in closer again on the details, and then even closer still with a nice little resolution. She spins and maybe there's a fade out. So you can see that's a first kind of really rough attempt at telling a story visually. It's not the strongest, it's not the best. And if you look through all the footage, which hopefully you have at this point, you know that we can have an even stronger sense. So when you're looking at your footage, there are two different types of edits that you really want to think about. The first one, which is the classical Hollywood style, is called inductive. And I've put together a little inductive sequence here. And inductive is basically hand-holding your audience through understanding. So you start off with a nice extreme long shot or a long shot. Sometimes these are called establishing shots. And what they do is exactly that. They establish where we are, what we're supposed to care about. We don't have a really, really extreme long shot in this footage of the entire gym, primarily because there were a lot of other people training around and none of them were part of the actual training that I was trying to capture. And so this is about as far as we got. There are a couple of shots that are a little longer than this, but this one you can actually see the people involved and you see the space and you get a sense of what's going on. So first shot in this case is really letting you know where you are and what's happening. And then what you do is you end up cutting in. So you have this long shot, you have a slightly closer shot. We move into this kind of medium shot where we're really paying attention to more of the details of what's actually happening in the movement, because her feet aren't moving as much here, so we're really paying attention to the boxing part. This wouldn't be the best shot if you were showing kicks necessarily, but we're moving in, we're hand holding, starting wide, getting closer, getting closer. Then we cut in here to a medium close-up or so as she's doing more stuff. Again, we can really start to pay attention to her as a character, because even though she's a real person, in the aspect of editing, all of your people that appear on screen are characters, and you have to think about building those characters and making your audience care about those characters. And this inductive style is a really easy way to kind of start wide and go in, and then we finally close in on a close-up so we can really study her face and kind of feel like we know her a little bit more. That's the weird thing about being an editor and about watching film, is you get this instant connection with people, because as your camera moves closer, you're basically taking your audience and moving them into a more intimate space with these people. And so a close-up, if you think about how close you would have to be to somebody to actually see them in this framing, that's a pretty intimate space. And so the inductive style is, again, just starting wide and moving our audience closer and closer to care about what's going on and to have understanding. That's the way most scenes will be cut most of the time. The polar opposite of that is called deductive. And since it's the polar opposite, I bet you can basically figure out what that means. Basically, you start off with close-ups. In this case, we got a close-up of her face. If we didn't know that this was a fight scene footage, we really wouldn't necessarily know what was going on because we just see her face in close-up. Then we cut to a close-up of her feet jumping. We can kind of get a sense, okay, we're getting the clues. We know sort of what's going on. We got this close. All right, we got it. Another close. Move out to like a medium shot, and we really kind of see what's going on. And then finally at the end, we cut out to this long shot to confirm, yeah, you figured it out. This is somebody training. So these are two very different methods of editing psychologically. Does that mean you have to always either go for one or the other? No, but you do have to think about the footage that you've got and the point of what you're trying to get your audience to feel, because that's the job of an editor, is to make your audience feel the story and be a part of that story, and what you want them to think or what call to action you have. Is this an edit just for entertainment's sake? That will be edited differently than if it's a marketing piece, than if you're trying to get people to buy something or attend something. So you always want to think about that. And those are just your two basic polar opposites. You'll use different pieces of each throughout a longer edit, but it's a good way to just start trying to assemble your footage and thinking about all of that. So another thing that you really want to kind of pay attention to is jump cuts and screen direction. So there's a thing called the 180 degree rule, and we use that when we are editing. And a good example of that is a sporting event. If your team is running left to right in whatever sporting event, put your favorite sport here, and the opposing team is moving on the field right to left, if you put your camera on the other side of the field, all of a sudden they're running the opposite way. So you always keep your cameras on one side of the field, so your team is always going left to right, left to right, left to right, and the other team is always going right to left, right to left. That way it looks like they're running towards each other, or you know exactly whose goal they're going for. And so especially when you're talking about action editing from a documentary perspective, that's a little tricky to do, because your subjects might be flipping back and forth on the screen left and screen right, moving from left to right, right to left, but you want to try to ease that as much as possible because it's really jarring have somebody go from one side to the next. So cutting from a shot like this to a shot like this would be a jump cut because she's just flipping on the screen. Her place in the frame is not being maintained. The other thing that you want to avoid in jump cuts, and just so you know, a jump cut is basically an edit that you feel. And you want to avoid those when you're editing. You don't want your audience to feel your edits. You want them to just follow the story and feel the psychology. Another issue with jump cuts is not just flopping on the screen, but cutting together two shots that are really similarly framed. So you wouldn't want to go from a medium shot to another medium shot. Cutting from this shot to this shot would be a jump cut because our angle is the same and our framing is pretty much the same. It's like this medium close-up. However, cutting from this shot to something closer to this shot would be better. It still might be a little of a jump because in order to avoid a jump cut, you want to change angles and you want to change framing. So going from a close-up to a long shot or a long shot to a close-up is good, but if it's exactly from the same angle, then it's also going to feel like a jump cut. So you can see between these two here, even though this is a long shot and this is a close-up, that might feel a bit like a jump because we're just kind of punching into a close-up. So what you want to do is always try to find those angles that switch, but not make those angles switch so much that you jump on the other side of the 180 degree rule. So you can see it gets a little bit complicated and a little bit messy. But that's what you're doing when you're kind of taking a look at your footage and figuring out the visual flow. So once you've taken a look at all of this again and made sense of all these things I've talked about, figure out if you want to do inductive or deductive and look out for jump cuts, then what you want to do is come on back and watch the next lesson.